So let's read.
Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing a video that is very fun and was just such a thrill for me to do because I've never really done anything like this before. Basically, a couple of weeks ago, I opened up like the asks on my Instagram and I asked you guys to send me some prompts for book recommendations, and the submissions that I got were so interesting and there were so many of them. So thank you guys so much for participating. I chose 10 to include in this video, just sort of in the interest of time. And yeah, I'll definitely be doing something like this again. So if your question wasn't chosen, please don't worry. So for the first prompt, I'm actually going to be consolidating two submissions. The first was asking for comfort reads and the other one was asking for recommendations when your soul needs a hug. So for this, I have 3 recommendations depending on the kind of soul weariness that you are experiencing at the time. So if you're going through the kind of soul weariness that's just like super down in the dumps, no will to live, sentimental, melancholic, that kind of thing, I would recommend Bluets by Maggie Nelson. These are a bunch of really tiny, almost like micro lyrical essays that all have to do with the color blue. So it's basically a catalog, and I believe there are around 240 mini lyrical essays just talking about the color blue and all of the associations that have to do with them. So for example, Blue by Joni Mitchell, Blue and Sadness, Blue and Bruises, Blue and Emptiness, that kind of thing, Blue in the Sea, Blue in the Sky. I think there are some lyrical essays in here also that talk about like stones, so like lapis lazuli, etc. And I think it's just such a beautiful dedication to the form. It's a beautiful dedication to its subject, and also reading this makes me feel less alone. I know it sounds strange, like to read about sadness when you're already sad, but there's just something about it. I feel like it's a misery loves company kind of thing, where it just helps you feel like there's someone else who's gone through this and they understand perfectly what it means to be sad. Up next is one that I would recommend for if you're feeling the kind of sad where it's not necessarily that you are like lonely, but it's just that you're kind of tired of the world, if that makes sense. And for that, I would recommend Can't and Won't by Lydia Davis. So for those of you guys who may not be familiar with Lydia Davis's work, she's one of my favorite authors because I really feel like she has such a unique writing style, and she's just able to write in a way that's accessible, but also there's a level of being like observant and really understanding the depth of words and how much one can convey depending on the way that you state something, the way that you phrase something. And Can't and Won't is basically a collection of her, I would call them like microfictions or micro essays even, depending on which work in particular. And she talks about how so many people throughout her lifetime have kind of insisted that she's writing poetry, but she says that she's not. She's still writing fiction, and she's gonna continue to write fiction that is like small and that is concise and which only talks about things in like the short span of words. And I do actually agree with Lydia Davis that she writes fiction and not poetry, just because the things that she writes about really dwell on narrative. They dwell on what's happening and not like the symbolic things that are happening under the surface, if that makes sense. It's just so good, and every time I read this I always feel so refreshed, just because she has a way of looking at ordinary things and making all of these insightful observations about them that you wouldn't necessarily think about, or which would slip your mind if you were too sort of trapped in your own head. So yeah, I think that this is a very good one for days when you're just not feeling the world, when you feel like hindi ka tao. And last but not the least for this prompt would be the Fairyland series by Catherine M. Valenti. So this series is about a young girl named September, and basically she ends up venturing into fairyland, and it's kind of like a classic tale, I guess. I feel like there are a lot of middle grade children's books that do this, but the thing that's really unique about Catherine M. Valenti is just the writing. She's so sharp with her descriptions, with the way that she makes September's character kind of edgy. I say that edgy is like a compliment, but she makes September have some bite, you know, like some kick. So it's not just like your typical, I can't find another word for it except like pabebe pabebe heroine that goes like into the fairyland. Yeah, and it's just such a nice story, and the twist in this first one in particular I really liked. If you guys like Magica Madoka, the anime, you will definitely like the twist in this one. So it's kind of a spoiler, but not really. The next prompt that I received was for when you're overworked or overtired / what is adulting. And I really felt this one, guys. Ang hirap maging tao in 2022, sa totoo lang. So yeah, for this, I'd like to recommend a book that I don't physically have with me because I lent it to a friend of mine. But basically, I would recommend Funny Weather, Art in an Emergency by Olivia Lang. I talked about this book a lot last year, but only because it's super good. Basically, there are a bunch of essays about art, but they're written in a way that isn't like snooty, that isn't like, oh yes, the art world, but rather it's written in a way that's accessible and that actually makes you want to go and look at the art. And I really appreciate that a lot of the artists that she talks about are artists whose work you can kind of look at online, and she doesn't just limit what she writes about to visual artists. So she also talks about some writers like Hilary Mantel, and she just talks about like the nuance of the freshness they bring to the table and how art can be super generative and art can really be something that feels healing, and it doesn't always have to I guess like be something that disturbs you or that unsettles you. And even when it does that, it's the kind of unsettling that still reaffirms like this zest for life. And I just really liked it because it talked so much about the kinds of agency that a person can have. Chef's kiss. The next prompt is a little bit more spicy, so a book recommendation for mommy or daddy issues. I had a book on like that touched on daddy issues, but I didn't really want to talk about that because I don't really like that book. And I'm not gonna recommend something just because it sort of touches on the prompt. So instead, I decided to go with one that deals very much with mothers and daughters and how who your mom is basically helps define who you become, whether you like it or not. This is Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ng. Basically, this book is set in this beautiful suburban neighborhood where everything is progressive, you know, people say hi to their neighbors, etc. But then there's also like this undercurrent of still being xenophobic, still being kind of racist, and this undertone of like pitying people who don't have enough and like talking to them in a certain way. It's just such a nuanced look at how people discriminate against other people in their communities. So the Richardsons are this very well-off white family who live in that like suburban paradise called Shaker Heights, and they have this huge house. The mother is like one of the lead journalists for the paper, and she's like a very hands-on type of mom, and their lives are kind of disrupted by the arrival of Mia Warren and her daughter Pearl. And Mia Warren is an artist. She's very eccentric. Her values are kind of different from the Richardsons' values in that the Richardsons like really value that kind of traditional type of you know, getting together, traditional markers for success, whereas Mia Warren is all about freedom, expression, etc. And things kind of escalate in this novel once their kids become friends, and I think it's just such a good look at the way that mothers affect their children and the way that children also react to what their mothers sort of impose on them. And in particular, like my favorite character in this is named Izzy. She's like the rebellious daughter of the Richardsons, and she's cool. And I found her really, really interesting. So yeah, I feel like I'm giving away too much, you know. I haven't spoken about this book in a long time, but yeah, I would definitely recommend this if you're looking for something that deals with parent-children relationships in a very nuanced and interesting way. Okay, up next is a book that's sweet but substantial. For this, I'd like to recommend an oldie but a goodie, and this is A Lightbulb Symphony by Phil Kay. This is one of my most prized possessions because I actually met Phil Kay, and this is a signed copy. So yeah, this is basically poetry, and it's just poetry that's very life-affirming. It's not the kind of poetry that's very esoteric or difficult to unpack. It's straightforward in that way, but it's done with so much craft and just so much thoughtfulness that I always feel invigorated like when I read this collection, and it touches on everything like love, death, friendship, growing up, history, basically like paying homage to your lineage and to who you are. And I really, really like this. I would recommend it to anyone. Even if you're a beginner in poetry, don't be intimidated by it. It's super duper good. The next prompt is by far the most like lyrical that was sent in. I'll read it actually because I want to get everything down exactly. So this one is, when your mind is a room and you suddenly open the window to let the light in. So for this, I have a very, very like aesthetic and just like mood-driven read, and that is Violet Bent Backwards Over the Grass by Lana Del Rey. Yes, my friends, the Lana Del Rey. This book is just so aesthetic, and also like Lana can write. Can I just say that? The poems in this are really good, super moody, all typed out like using a typewriter, and then there are also like really nice photos in this that are just such a mood and so aesthetic. And also, this is on Audible and they're read by Lana herself, and just the way she reads them, so good. I would definitely recommend like downloading it on Audible and reading this while listening to that. It feels like you're somewhere in northern Italy in the 1980s falling in love. The next prompt was really difficult for me, honestly, because I feel like there are so many good books that kind of fulfill this one, but yeah, in the end I was able to decide on just one book. So the prompt for this is the greatest love versus the love that you settle for, and for this I chose Tipping the Velvet by Sarah Waters. This is basically a queer love story, and it's also historical fiction. It's set in the Victorian era. This book follows Sue, who leaves her hometown because she falls in love with Kitty. Kitty is a theater performer, so she leaves to be with Kitty, but then her feelings aren't quite reciprocated. Like, Kitty kind of leads her on, etc. So even if Kitty was like her great love or the one that she super desired or super wanted, she ends up falling in love with someone else toward the end of the book, after a lot of sexual exploration. Yeah, she finds someone who is more, I guess, stable, and also who treats her better. And the reason why I want to recommend this book is I feel like it still draws a distinction between those two types of love, where there is that kind of love that just drives you crazy and drives you insane, and it makes you want to change your name, give up your life, etc. But it doesn't paint the more stable love in a way that's less, or in the way that's like boring, if that makes sense. It also gives us a look at what a love that's mature and nourishing can really bring to the table in terms of like an adventure. Alright, up next, I love this one. Books for raging against the machine. So like capitalism, current systems in place, etc. So first is a non-fiction read, of course, and this is Trick Mirror by Gia Tolentino, and I freaking love this. Gia Tolentino is Filipina American, and she writes for The New Yorker, and these essays are just like, I'm like, girl, kababayan ka na nga, ka-generation pa kita. Like, this is amazing. She talks about feminism and how it's been co-opted by a system that is inherently patriarchal. It talks about reality TV and why our generation was like so susceptible to its trappings. It also talks about social media, and something that I love about this book is she mentions that pre-social media, people kind of had this backstage to be themselves. So for example, if I were gonna go to the office on Monday pre-social media, I could just be myself all the rest of the time that I'm away from the office or I'm at home. But because of social media, we have like this pressure to be on all the time, to be at your best all the time, because it's either you're seen as being performative or fake, or you are being performative and fake because of that pressure, if that makes sense. And it's just so good. Like, yes, everybody needs like a backstage. People need time to just be themselves and not have to apologize for it. I also have a fiction recommendation for this prompt, and this is The Refrigerator Monologues by Catherine M. Valenti. These are interconnected short stories, and they all revolve around the girlfriends of superheroes who have been killed off in service of the plot. And it's just so good. Like, the stories are compelling, but also it's just such a statement with this whole kind of shtick in comic books where the girlfriend or the ex-girlfriend has to die so that the guy can get character development. Like, well done, Catherine MV. The next one really had me kind of laughing, and it's very timely because I just read what I'm gonna recommend for this. So it's a book for when you're single and feeling super single, but you kind of want to find hope again. So for this, I would recommend Beach Read by Emily Henry. So this book is about January Andrews, who is a writer. She writes novels and romance novels, like, in particular, and she's really down in the dumps. Her boyfriend left her, her dad died. She found out that her dad was cheating on her mom, and she'd kind of lost all hope in that fairy tale ending. So because of that, she's also broke because she basically has to work on a new novel, but she's struggling because obviously she doesn't really buy the fantasy of the happy ending that she used to really believe in. And because of that, she ends up moving out to this kind of lake house that her dad owned. And while she's there, she meets her neighbor, Augustus Everett, who's also a novelist, but he writes literary fiction. It's really like dark and mysterious and deals with like heavy things, etc. And at first they really dislike each other. They kind of find each other annoying, or at least January thinks that Augustus finds her annoying. And basically what they do to kind of get out of their writing ruts is that they end up having this bet where Augustus is gonna try to write a romance novel and January is gonna try and write a literary fiction novel. And it's just so cute. It's so cute. And toward the end, she kind of addresses her notions of love and like fantasy and sort of nursing this idea of what a happily ever after should look like. And yeah, I think that if you are someone who's looking to fall in love again, or like to end a period of being single, this might be a book that will #give you hope. And last but not the least, this prompt is a book recommendation for gays with loveless lives. So thing is, I was super like not sure what to recommend for this, because I know that there are some books that are hopeful, but I'm not sure if that would help, or like would it make you feel worse if you didn't have someone. So I decided to go with a book that I basically recommend to everyone, and that is On Cursed Ground by Vicente Garcia Grayon. So Sir Grayon was my prof in my master's for fiction, and he's just a really good writer. He has a lot of stories here that have to do with the gay experience and just the phenomenon of like feeling alone and feeling isolated. And he has a story here that I know won a lot of awards, like Boys Who Like Boys. He writes so well, and he writes about like, I don't know, like the atmosphere of things really well, if that makes sense. And the romance is never cheesy, it's never overbearing, it's always kind of desire. It's a lot about desire, and I feel like that would be a good like starting point, especially if you're feeling down in the dumps about being loveless. Yeah. Also, yes, I know the cover of this is like, oh my god, it's like word art galore. But I promise, don't judge the book by the cover. Maganda. Maganda yung mga short stories. And I really hope that you enjoy it if you decide to pick it up. So that's it for this video, guys. I feel like this video was like super long. Thank you so much for sticking with me through this. And yeah, let me know if you enjoyed this kind of video format. Let me know if you've read any of these books, or if you have any book recommendations for the prompts that were given in this video. Don't forget to like this video if you liked it, and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys next time.